Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Del Beccaro, and welcome to Politics in Perspective. Want to thank Ex America News, WorldViewTube.com, AUNTV, YouTube, and Rumble for carrying us. A lot to talk about this week, as always. So why don't we get right to it? In this show, we're going to talk about what forever wars mean and why that sadly applies to Iran, but maybe not in the way you think. Then my good friend Rod Martin will be here, and we're going to talk about investing in Trump 2.0. What you'd be doing with your money right now. It's a midterm election year. You have the war. You have Trump and his tax cuts. What's that all mean to your pocketbook if you're an investor? I think you're going to enjoy that. And then we're going to talk about Gavin Newsom. He keeps talking, which means he keeps lying, but he also got some bad polling news, and we'll talk about that in the political roundup session. And of course, talk to Annie, my producer, who's originally from Iran, who gives us the best reporting, far better than you're going to see on the major networks. So let's get right to it. Well, you've heard the term forever war, and the Trump voters were against forever war. So, what's a forever war? Well, Afghanistan was a forever war. We went there, we were there for an incredibly long time. Vietnam was a forever war. Iraq, in some ways, was a forever war in people's mind, meaning years and years and years where American troops are bogged down, far away from home, and it doesn't look like there's an exit strategy. And voters are against that. Americans have tired of that. But is that the end of the story? Okay, so we're against forever wars? Well, sadly, we need to realize that warfare has completely changed. Long ago, warfare was defined as two armies sitting across from each other, right? And now we have missiles going large distances. But the reality of the forever war is with cyber warfare and psyops. And we are in a forever war. And because of the technological age where barbarians are at the gate at all times, America and Americans need to realize that we live in a different time and we are in forever wars, literally forever. So, what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at Iran. Iran does two things within the United States of major significance. Iran funds the discontent on college campuses and elsewhere. Their operatives don't necessarily carry guns and look to kill people with a gun. What they do is cause dissent within America. They've been doing this a long time. They believe, meaning their regime, believes that that's a way to weaken America, weaken its resolve, and therefore look internally. And then they can do what they want to do in the Middle East. So Iran conducts this nonstop, right? Indeed, think about who was in Mondami inside the mayor's mansion in New York City. Operatives, probably operatives who got money sooner or later, somewhere along the line from Iran that funneled through to them. But there's also the issue of cyber warfare. And that is the forever war. We are never again going to be in a world where tech doesn't dominate. And what do I mean by that? Well, in the olden days, you had two big oceans. Those oceans don't matter because you can sit behind the desk anywhere in the world, be affiliated with Russia, China, or Iran, push some buttons, and start a hacking process. You don't have to do it from within Iran. Because remember, Iran, Russia, China, they have others do their dirty work a lot of times. We saw it this past week when the medical giant Stryker, we can bring that up, was hacked and the hack was linked to Iran. Now, why did they choose this particular company? We don't know. But it caused major issues for Stryker. What do I mean by that? Their phone system went down, and they don't even know what data was lost. They lost data, meaning they wiped some computers, is my understanding. But we don't know the magnitude of what happened to Stryker. That's going to cost Stryker a lot of money. But Iran isn't interested in Stryker per se, but to demonstrate their capacity. What they do on an everyday basis, virtually, is attack somewhere in the United States, big institutions, banking, the government, the defense industry, all of that. And that process is the forever war that is never going to go away. 10 years from now, when we hit quantum computing, the ability to do that will be really unimaginable right now. And that is why it is so necessary, in my opinion, to remove bad actors today before they get those powers. So Maduro is gone, and Venezuela is actually doing pretty darn well. A lot better than anyone talked about, and it's why the press doesn't cover so much of what's going on in Venezuela. But we need to reduce the number of bad actors in the world before quantum computing comes around and this power to hack exponentially increases, and the United States is so much in trouble. Now, also this week, we have seen the Democrats attacking the Trump administration and trying to tell us about foreign policy. Well, should we listen to the Democrats in Washington, D.C. about foreign policy? I posted this week this meme related to the Democrats' recent history in foreign policy. Remember, the last two administrations, Biden and Obama, either gave money to Iran, lifted sanctions against Iran, or turned a blind eye, meaning even though the sanctions were there, they just turned a blind eye. What did Iran do with that money? Well, they funded Hamas, Hezbollah, and they attacked Israel, fomented a war. In general, they were the world's largest state sponsor of terror. And incredibly, 53 Democrats voted against a resolution acknowledging that. So should we listen to the Democrats about what should be done with Iran? Because their abject failure in that regard has caused Americans a lot of trouble. Don't forget, under Obama and Biden, Russia invaded Ukraine. They invaded them twice. They waited till Trump was gone the first time. Biden's Afghan withdrawal was a disaster. By the way, more Americans died in that than in this war with Iran. Think about that. More of them just in the way America under Biden cut and run from Afghanistan. And keep in mind, that process convinced many that American resolve was no more. And under Biden and those people, it wasn't. Don't forget that under Obama and Hillary, ISIS became a major issue. I remember it clearly. Do you remember when those videos of people in cages and ISIS killing them? At the time, I thought to myself, my God, what is the end to this? Are we to ever live in this age of ISIS? Well, Trump came in and ended that process, but it wouldn't have ended under Obama and the Democrats. And then, of course, Benghazi. The disgrace of it, the weakness it demonstrated, and the fact that they lied about it. That's the record, the recent record of Democrats when they were in charge of foreign policy. The reality is the Democrats haven't been good on foreign policy in decades upon decades. The problem is that under Jimmy Carter, when they were weak, the ocean still protected us to a great degree. But that's no more. Now we live in the tech age. Now we live with China. China was virtually unheard of during the Carter regime. It was all about Russia. That's all changed now. Now we live, like I say, in a tech age with barbarians at the gate, meaning they are trying to disrupt the American economy, cause chaos here, and all they have to do is succeed once. Imagine if the banking system was hacked for hours or a day. What would that do to America? If you can't even get to your money online, what would that do to you? When you put all of that in perspective, at least for my money, you get to understand the urgency of removing the worst actors if you can. Venezuela was one, Iran's another, Cuba to a somewhat lesser degree, but also true. And in the process, you defund to a significant degree China's ambitions too, because they no longer have those client states of Venezuela and Iran. That's my opening statement. We'll be back right after this with my friend Rod Martin talking about investing in Trump 2.0. Thanks for watching. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. This is our difference maker interview, and I've been wanting to do this interview really since the start of the year. Some events got in the way, but Rod Martin's one of the smartest people in America today, at least for my money, because he understands money, but he understands geopolitics. And so if you're going to talk about money, the market, and things like this, I think you need someone who has both of those things on his mind, and there's few better than Rod Martin. So let's bring him in. Thanks so much, boss, for coming in. Rodmartin.org. Go there, sign up, do whatever you can. Great to have you on. I continue to watch you on Fox Business, so thanks for coming down to the to this level. Investing in Trump 2.0. I think we live in this age, let's start here, of volatility and overreactions in the market. What do you think?
Well, tremendous overreaction. And you would expect that a bunch of people who manage money wouldn't overreact because they'd have done their homework. They'd have figured out the fundamentals. Well, the fundamentals with Trump are really simple. He's been telling you everything there is to know about him going back into the 80s, if not the 70s. And hey, he even wrote books for you. You can read The Art of the Deal. You can read Surviving at the Top. You can read The Art of the Comeback, which, by the way, is the best of his books. Out of print currently, but you can find it on Amazon. He tells you what he's doing. And what is he doing? He is giving you the appearance of unpredictability. He is giving you the appearance of randomness. He's giving you the appearance that all these things are disconnected, when in fact there's a grand master plan. And he's always going to ask maximally, and then he's going to work his way to what he actually wanted to live with from the beginning. So none of this is shocking. If you watched The Apprentice, you know. But nevertheless, the markets continue to be flummoxed because they're used to two generations of American leaders telegraphing every move, saying exactly what they will and won't do long in advance so our enemies can take advantage of us. Trump's just not going to play that game.
All right, you used an interesting word there, fundamentals. Earnings were good.
Yeah.
But the market seems to, I think, overreacted to Iran. I get instability in the oil market, although there's more than enough oil for American companies. I say that because it's not as if the Mag 7 needs to worry about oil,
Right.
right? America has it. So if the fundamentals are so good, what is in the minds of these money managers that they're willing to dump stock instead of stay still?
Well, I think it's a mistake, needless to say. I would not be doing that. However, it's understandable. We've seen this in prior crises. You'll recall what happened after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990. And we actually had a very short, very shallow recession there for a minute for no good reason, honestly. I mean, a lot of that was just hooey, and then we saw that borne out. But there was this foreboding sense that somehow Bush was going to get us into Vietnam. And they had the wrong Bush. That was actually W. They were mistaken. But nevertheless, Trump isn't going to get us into Vietnam. He's not going to get us into Iraq or Afghanistan. Trump is going to deliver shockingly short, sharp American power in an overwhelming fashion. We saw it in Venezuela. We're seeing it in Iran. And he's going to let the people on the ground sort it out. In Venezuela, that means a ton of oil coming online that had been offline already because Delcy Rodriguez isn't stupid. And she knows that if he can take the Maduros and put them in a jail cell in New York, he can dang sure do the same thing to her and to anybody who comes after her. So they're not idiots. They know what they're dealing with, and we'll get to a free and fair election that is actually properly counted, and the opposition is going to win. It's just a matter of when. Iran is different, but it's not that different. And one of the biggest news items today, everybody's focused on the oil tankers getting hit in the Gulf. That's not going to be that big a deal because we're going to start escorting those tankers. And the Iranian sea-based drones, there is a limited number of them, but even if there weren't, they can't take on the U.S. Navy. So that problem goes away. But what really happened this morning that should have everybody's attention is reports of targeted drone strikes in the streets of Tehran against regime police who are controlling and terrorizing the population. Individual traffic stops being blown up, stuff like that. That is a level of detail that's unprecedented in the history of warfare, certainly by remote control. And I think that tells you the administration intends there to be a regime change carried out by the Iranian people that does not involve our boots on the ground. And the market is just overreacting. It's plain as day.
Okay, so I don't want to give away your age, although your white beard says that you're quite wise. You and I are both old enough to remember the phrase "buy on the bombs."
Yes.
The economy is in good shape in the sense that Trump is reducing the cost of doing business in America,
Yeah.
which is a good thing. It's all in place. You look at the market this year, it's shed about depending on the day, 3,000 points, the Dow at least. What do you see ahead this year in the American economy? Because obviously that's going to impact the midterms. So what do you see in a broad perspective for the economy this year?
Well, this was a safer prediction 6 months ago, but but I think we're headed into a boom. I think the steam is already there and the train is moving down the tracks and just picking up speed at an enormous rate. And Iran is a distraction from that, but it's part of the overall global puzzle going forward. So here at home, our friend George Gilder will tell you that as much as he hates the tariffs, tax cuts and tax predictability are vastly more powerful and have been shown to be so over the last 40 years than anything else that you can do in the economy. And so he's very bullish on this, as I am, and I know Art Laffer is, and I know Stephen Moore is, and I know Larry Kudlow is, because we are in the best tax regime we've been in my adult lifetime. And I believe if the president does well in the midterms, we can get even better than that. But regardless, that's a big part of it. Second, I actually think the tariffs were a great idea, even though I'm a free trader, because I have always said what we have is not free trade. What we have is a lopsided tariff regime that favors everybody except the United States, deliberately constructed to get over the destruction of World War II. We wanted to stand up our allies and some of our defeated enemies so that they could resist communism. And we set up an entire global order that America subsidizes. Now, we get benefits from that, God knows, we could list those for a while, but it still is ridiculous on trade. So much so that until this past year, Germany was charging us 4 times the auto tariff we were charging them. India was charging us 100% on Harley Davidson. Canada, 280% on dairy. That's an embargo. You're not calling it an embargo because that's an act of war, so you don't use that word. But a 280% tariff on cheese means nobody buys the cheese. So, these are absurdities. And what Trump has done is he has forced people onto a more level playing field that results in a long-term incentive to negotiate tariff rates down. And he said himself at the G7 in 2018, I'm a Wharton guy. I understand that the optimum trade barrier is 0, but you guys won't do it with us. So we're going to deal with you. Well, we're dealing with them now. And what that has done is it's incentivized a tremendous amount of construction in the United States, of manufacturing capacity we were told could never come back. That 18 trillion in investment from outside the country is very real. That's almost 2/3 the size of the entire US GDP. It won't all be here this year, but a lot of it will be here this year. And we will see an ongoing boom that will not actually be that dissimilar from Reagan's.
All right. Well, I like that because Reagan had several quarters where growth was above 6%. And that's one of the reasons why the senior Bush won the presidency, which is actually really rare for a vice president to win that. All right, so let's translate that into the market because, as your friend Charles Payne says, because we all want to make money, right? So I'm going to bring up a chart here, which I have talked about over the years. And Annie, if we can bring this first chart up. The Dow Jones performance in midterm election years. The midterm years are all circled.
Mhm.
And quite honestly, for my opinion, they look like they constantly go sideways in midterm years. And the real pickup is once the presidency is decided, then it can move forward. So we're in a midterm year. And if we go to the next chart, we've seen so far in 2026, well, that looks pretty sideways to me. So you're on Fox Business talking about the markets all the time. So I got a lot of money in the market. I got a lot of money in cash too. So care to comment on my hypothesis that midterm election years go sideways until things are sorted out?
Well, we did just see, this overreaction to Iran. So can the market screw this up? Sure. I wouldn't be shocked by that, but I think they're missing the story, and I think they're missing a lot of buying opportunities. I don't necessarily think that we're going to have a normal midterm year, and there are several things in play there. One is the number of changes in election laws around the country are really quite remarkable, and many of them actually favor more honest elections. That clearly benefits Republicans. We ran an article this morning that Alexander Muse wrote about how the census was rigged in 2020, using statistical analysis and just ridiculously unconstitutional efforts to avoid the Constitution's requirement for an actual enumeration. What did that do? Well, long and the short of it, it's a 3,800 word article going in depth on it. But the bottom line is it shifted 9 House seats and 9 electoral votes to the Democrats all by itself. That's before you start really properly counting the illegal aliens and their effect and, all the different things. Another thing that's coming before the Supreme Court, of course, is racial gerrymandering. And the Louisiana case is really fascinating, but here's what's even more so. There are over 60 Black held House seats. Only 21 of them are racially gerrymandered districts. If that doesn't demonstrate that you don't need racial gerrymandering to get Black representation, I don't know what possibly could. So I think that's a 6-3, maybe even a 7-2 to undo that. And that puts about 21 seats in play. My guess is, knowing that a decent number of those are in Texas and obviously Louisiana and certainly Florida, I think we've got a decent chance then of drawing a more honest redistricting map. And net, I think we end up with real House gains in November.
Okay, so I appreciate that, and I agree that of those dynamics. I don't know exactly. I'm gone neutral on whether the House flips or not. I was positive to state in Republicans. I've gone neutral right now, but why the hell didn't Republicans? They knew about what that dynamic you described about the BS of how the census was manipulated and the seats were allocated. Why didn't they sue in 2021 to undo that and fix the seats?
Well, there was one lawsuit in Alabama that got dismissed, and it was on in my view, bogus procedural ground. We've now got a case here in Florida that looks like it's actually going to make, and that's just a whole new thing. I think we can get it overturned. And if that were the case, then you really have a very different outcome, because all of a sudden we're talking about 9 more seats potentially in play and 9 more electoral votes potentially on the R side in 28. So that's really promising. And it's just a death by 1,000 cuts. The Democrats have stuffed maybe not the ballot box, but certainly the electorate through opening the border. They have manipulated the census to shift House seats and electoral votes into states they control. They have, and there does seem to be some meaningful election fraud. I don't think it was accidental that Tulsi Gabbard was in Fulton County when the FBI raided the place. And I don't think it's accidental that we did what we did in Venezuela when we did it. I think we're going to find that Mr. Maduro is likely to be very cooperative as a witness describing how that election was stolen. And I'm not sure that they're going to be able to get out of that box. So bottom line, we still have to actually win hearts and minds. We actually still have to stay ahead of things. But I can encourage you on a handful of points. One, Fox last week found that 98% of self-identified MAGA are with the president on Iran. So Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and a few people on X are talking to each other. That isn't real. There's not a real divide. Is there a divide among Republicans? Not that much. Actually, 2024 Trump voters, 86% supporting the president on Iran. In the country as a whole, obviously, if you're watching CNN, you believe that the Iranians are about to take St. Louis, but for other people, we know better. And sure enough, at the outset of the war, Rasmussen was finding 50% in favor, so kind of a 50-50 split. That's up to 52 after nearly 2 weeks. And when Trump wins this, oh my gosh, Katie barred the door. It won't be as good as Bush got in 91, but it'll be good.
All right. You brought up some topics that I've been, but I still need to get some sense of you where you are on the economy, because there's so many. There's this liquidity crisis, the fundamentals, what's happening with the Mag 7 and software and all these investments. The last time I had you on, it was I want to say it was September, and I said the market would finish at 48,000. It did finish at 48,000 in
Well
December.
done.
Well, I was under pressure from you, so I had to perform. How are you feeling about the market this year? Will it go sideways? And if let's assume it goes sideways, it doesn't dramatically jump or fall. So, like, I have about 27% in cash or cash instruments, or what savings instruments, and then others in stock. I'm not overly aggressive at this point. Where are you?
I think
It,
it's going. I think it's going to be hard to deny the magnitude of the economic growth by third quarter. I don't think that's going to be very deniable. So the outlier is, how bad will the media lie about everything so that they can get their team over the top in November? Well, you know the answer to that. They're just absolutely going to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Death Star is about to blow up Alderaan at every moment. So that's just how it goes. But will the market take that seriously? Not if Trump wins in Iran, not if we really get some good employment growth, not if rates come down so that you solve that liquidity crisis. Another really interesting thing that's popping up, you mentioned it just briefly on AI, we're seeing tremendous productivity gains. And when you understand, AI really hasn't penetrated American industry that much yet. The gains we're seeing are really quite remarkable, and all the more so in this. As I predicted, I've been saying this for years, it's not killing jobs. It's making jobs much more productive. So if you have a task-based job that can be taken over by a machine, then yeah, you're toast. I mean, basically, you're a sharecropper in 1880 and tractors are coming. But all those sharecroppers aren't in a bread line. All those sharecroppers went and got a better job. They got some training so that they had more skills, and their standard of living shot up. That's what we're seeing with AI. AI is a tremendous tool. It is not a person. It is not sentient. Again, George Gilder's been saying for decades, computation is not comprehension. And if you work with AI as much as I do, you know this is a really amazing tool that really doesn't know anything. It certainly can't reason. It can't create. So if I use it for something, I have to direct it. And so the human function becomes more and more important the more powerful the tool is. And I think we're going to see some productivity gains that just knock people's socks off over this year, and then even more the next year, and even more the next.
So good you transitioned to that, because I was going to bring up, if we can bring up a graphic real quick. This was your recent post about AI, so you went to it. So I have for years, interested in your reaction to this statement I'm going to make. I have for years said a couple of things. One I know you're going to agree with, but I've asked Forbes, Moore, Laffer, and everybody this question. Look, if you had a horse-drawn carriage, you decried the automobile, and nobody even knew what an automobile really was. And now it's 20% or 18% all associated industries of the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Computers, they were going to displace everything. Now their tech is what percentage of the economy, right?
Oh, yeah.
We have no idea what the economy is going to be like when you finally reach 60 years old in 20 years, right? So that's what happens. These changes come. People say it's the end of the world. They have Malthusian thoughts, and yet all these jobs and new industries are created. I have, and this is, I know you agree with that, but I have said, and Steve Forbes is on recently and agreed with me, others have, we have undercalculated the productivity gains of the computer age.
Oh, yes.
All right, go
Absolutely.
have at it.
Well, you're exactly right. I can do so much with my phone. I can almost function without an actual laptop or desktop machine for most purposes most of the time. Who could have imagined such a thing? Star Trek didn't imagine such a thing. It just boggles the mind. And, people made jokes about the name iPad, which I never understood because they were totally ripping off Star Trek's pads from Next Generation. Just put an I in front of it so they didn't owe Paramount a royalty.
Everybody, he's just admitting he's a Trekkie nerd, just right here
Oh,
on
100%. But remember those pads? They were like this thick and they were big and bulky, and you had a different one for every purpose. My phone is 1,000,000,000% better than a pad on Star Trek, supposedly in the 24th century. It has just shot past everything. No one is calculating the productivity gains correctly. They're not close. Now, that gap is only going to increase. I would contend we need to just completely rethink how we calculate GDP, to be honest. There's just so many statistics we have that are fundamentally flawed. But on the AI side, you put up the article there, and it is brilliant. It's by a university professor in artificial intelligence who actually leads AI development for PricewaterhouseCoopers, and he's just a brilliant guy. I hate to credit him for it because he's French, but we'll love him anyway. And he is exactly where George Gilder is. He's exactly where George was 20 years ago. That this is a shockingly powerful tool. It is not a replacement for people. And there's a limit to that because, again, like I said, tasks may change. If I have a bunch of sharecroppers, I can replace them with one guy on a tractor. There's no question about that. But the minute they get a little more training, they're vastly more valuable to themselves than they were as a sharecropper. And they move up the food chain. Their standard of living goes up, and pretty soon they're putting their kids through college. That's the history of the 18th century, the 19th century, and the 20th century. It's not going to be different now. And seeing these productivity gains and how it's sorting out in the industries that are adopting AI is really very encouraging.
Yeah, I brought up Thomas Malthus, who basically said population will outstrip food supply and it'll be a disaster. And then there was a
Well,
massive.
and Tom, everybody forgets in the final edition of that book, Malthus repudiates his own theory. Malthus admits this isn't working out the way I thought. No, none of this is true. Well, here we are, all these centuries later, and we still have Paul Ehrlich running around promising the imminent famine. And nobody, well, thank God for Julian Simon. That's all I can say. But nobody wants to hear the truth because the truth isn't a good science fiction movie. And that's really the thing. Everybody wants the apocalypse because it's entertaining. They just don't want to personally live through it.
And what we need to remember from a historical point of view is that a dynamic economy produces wealth, and dynamic economies are what we have today. AI is a part of that. If you want a stagnant economy where you won't lose your job, there's good places on earth for you to go, like Russia and Cuba, where poverty absolutely reigns. Before I lose you, I want to bring up you recently posted on Tucker Carlson and Trump's reaction to him. Uh, well, I've never been a Tucker Carlson fan because I don't think he has intellectual rigor. I don't think he has a philosophy in his head as to cause and effect, what freedom means, what economic history is. I think he just belongs in the age of rant. And so, what, real quick, we have about a minute to go. What what do you think's going on? Is this just people seeking attention, or what does this mean to the conservative movement, which you're a strong part?
Well, it's certainly good for clicks, and that does translate to money in very predictable ways that I am very happy to take my part of, but not at the cost of my soul. And my gosh, Tucker is playing basketball with his brain here. How many studies have disproven this crazy idea that all the Ashkenazi Jews are really Khazars? That's not true. Why would anybody buy the lie that DNA testing is illegal in Israel? That's not true. 23andMe is illegal in Israel because they don't want the data going to the Google guys. That's a completely different thing. Yeah, from beginning to end, all of these nutty conspiracy theories drive clicks. He bought a house in Qatar for a reason. I don't know what it is, but I mean, I wouldn't buy a house in Qatar. There's some reason pushing that. I don't know, but I know that it's damaging, and I'm glad the president called it out.
We can I could talk to Rod forever. You should too. So what you should do is go to his website, rodmartin.org. Lots of great stuff there. I'm not saying you should go to his website over mine, tomdell.com, but you should definitely check it out frequently throughout the week. Rod, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on. And I'm going to bring you back towards, I don't know, June,
Okay.
July. We'll get an update on your many, many thoughts. Thanks so
Wonderful.
much, and we'll be right back on Politics in Perspective. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Rod is certainly a brilliant man. You should definitely follow him and think about his ideas. We're not per se giving you investment advice, but we're giving you something to think about. And I want to thank our sponsors again, AUN TV, worldviewtube.com, and X America News. Uh, Go to my Substack. I publish at least every Wednesday night. I also do memes and other things. I do a lot on Facebook for whatever reason, Instagram, and you can catch all of these shows on Political Vanguard, the whole history of them. There's some great guests there. Michelle Tafoya is running for Senate in Minnesota. We had her on before those ambitions. You'll be impressed by her. I've had a lot of great guests, including my producer Annie, about Iran. Before we get to Iran, let's talk about Gavin Newsom a little bit. He's in the news again. The man can't stop talking. Kenny. So, if you remember, Scott Bessent, the great Treasury Secretary, said he was an economic illiterate. I think it was Mark Twain who said, better to be presumed ignorant than to open your mouth and demonstrate it. And Gavin Newsom demonstrates his economic illiteracy every time he speaks. Now, he's trying to blame Trump for the high gas prices, but a year ago, let's say April 2025, and this is my latest on Substack, the reality was that California's price per gas average for regular was 485 when the country was 317. Now, think about that. It is the highest gas price in the lower 48. Okay, the highest gas taxes. Actually, it's the highest gas prices in the country, highest gas taxes in the lower 48. And part of those taxes relate to environmental programs, which consumers in California pay for every time they buy gas. So Newsom blaming Trump is typical Newsom. He says it's not my fault, which is basically what he says about everything wrong with California. It's not my fault. Well, okay, but do you really want that guy for president? But let's get back to his complete illiteracy. He said, literally, this is what he put out there, that he's against the gas tax because he thinks if you cut the gas tax, the oil companies will, quote unquote, pocket the money because there's no assurance it'll go to consumers. So this is what I call a Newsomism. Okay, he's saying that if the government doesn't impose a tax, then the oil companies will keep prices high and pocket the difference. Hello? A tax that isn't imposed isn't pocketed by anyone. You didn't give the tax at the pump, so it's not collected by the oil company and not given to the government. How would they keep it higher if the gas tax was limited? Keep this in mind. His sole evidence of this was 1 month holiday of gas tax in Florida in 2022. They had a 25% gas tax. They took it off for a month. And Newsom says the evidence was that the oil companies pocketed the money. While he's just lying. Here's what happened in October of 2022. The price in Florida of gas was 30 cents, 3.30 in September. Then it went down to 3.15, and in November it went up over $4. So it dipped in October about 15 cents. It didn't dip the full 25. And Newsom says, well, that's evidence that the oil company pocketed it. But as I demonstrated in my article, in fact, what happened was that oil prices across the country, gas prices rose during the month of October. But gas prices in Florida actually dropped. Why? Because the tax was eliminated. But because the base price of gas rose, it didn't drop the full 25 cents. If it had stayed flatline, meaning the cost to acquire it, it would have been completely that you would have gotten the full 25-cent discount. But because the acquisition price rose, they didn't get what looked like a 25% discount, but they did benefit. It would have been worse. They would have paid 25 cents or more during that month. But Newsom and his Newsomism says that it was pocketed by the oil company. He's just lying. He just makes stuff up. Like, he lost his birth certificate when he was 7 years old, as if any 7-year-old in the world knows what the hell a birth certificate is like. He also got some more bad news. Let's look at some polling. In this polling for presidential ambitions, now keep this in mind, this is an NBC poll. And I picked out 4 people, Vance and Rubio, and Harris and Newsom. Now, we are in the divided era. Never forget that. If you look at Vance, 49% negative, adding the last 2, versus 38 at least somewhat positive. He's got a high negative. He's tied very much to Trump. Of course, that means all the Democrats hate him. Marco Rubio, for whatever reason, is 34% positive or somewhat positive, and only 41%. So he's doing better by 8 than Vance. Again, this demonstrates the divided era, right? Now let's move on to the Democrats. Take a look at Kamala Harris. Her negatives reach over 50, somewhat negative 11, very negative 40. That's a really high number. 51, but only 34 like her. That's Democrats, essentially. But here's the problem for Newsom. And why this matters is Newsom is a first-time national candidate. Well, the problem for him is that his negatives are already in the 45. Very negative 36 versus Rubio's 26. Why does that matter? Well, these are hard negatives that are not going to change, right? His positives are only 27. 27? The Democrats, remember, make up probably 33% of the electorate, which means that he's in trouble among Democrats. That's bad news for him. All right, that's our political roundup. Now let's get a quick update from Annie with regard to the war in Iran. And what I want to talk to her about today is something very specific because they picked, quote unquote, a new leader. But imagine this. Imagine you're in a godfather-like status. The prior Ayatollah picks him, in his will says, don't put my son in charge. And now they put him in charge. And the question I have to ask for Annie is, what does that mean? What is the status of that regime when that's how far they had to reach?
Well, thank you, Tom, for having me back on. A status is what we know of Sharia Shia-based supreme leadership has completely collapsed. Not only the father didn't want the son to be the next leader, and the reason for that was because he doesn't have the qualifications to be a supreme leader, but also that two other candidates that had the qualification actually turned down the job. The two clerics.
Is that because they didn't think they'd be around next week to talk about it?
Exactly. They figured, why take the job when they can escape, hide somewhere in Iraq or Pakistan or Afghanistan and survive another day to fight. So with this choice, and I want to put this out there, if the son is even alive, it's been 4 days since the confirmation. No video of him, no audio of him, no picture of him, nothing. But even if he is alive and somehow injured somewhere, he has zero qualification and they still pushed him to be the new quote-unquote supreme leader of Iran.
Okay, another thing with your great reporting that you see nowhere else, you reported on the fact that throughout the country, there are checkpoints in strategic areas and cities. Why don't you describe that and why that's meaningful to you?
Of course. So they increased the checkpoints actually dramatically because now they're worried, especially with President Trump on, I think Wednesday or Tuesday, he said something of, we're almost done. There's no more targets to target. We're wrapping up. What they're worried about is the people of Iran are going to come back and pick up the revolution where they left it off 2 weeks ago. So they are trying to get ahead of the remaining parts of this revolution. However, the beauty of it is, so far, the Israeli military has been able to do what we call a precision attack on these checkpoints right in the middle of a street, taking out the IRGC soldiers who are running these checkpoints. So I'm not even sure if they're going to last long enough to do any crackdowns, but their concern is what was promised will be delivered, which was originally both Bibi and President Trump said, we come and take him out, but you have to take your country yourself. That means return of people to the street.
Well, we'll keep watching for that. That's all we have this week for Politics in Perspective, the podcast. Please share this. My books are over my shoulder, The Divided Era, The Lessons of the American Civilization. Join me on Substack. And as always, we'll see you next week on Politics in Perspective.